All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for hopping on. We'll give the rest of our folks a few more minutes and then we will get rolling. So how about it, my dudes? It's like September. I can't believe it's September already. It's crazy.
It is super weird. Yeah.
Time's flying, but yet going by so slow. I don't really know. I don't have a. I feel like after last year, after 2020 and the whole like initial start and dealing with and understanding the pandemic thing, right? Like, we've had a lot of time now to get used to it, but there's still some stuff. But that whole thing, like, I don't even know what the concept of time is anymore, honestly. Like, I don't know what light and dark is outside. Like, I just time passing and any kind of like hint that time is passing, it just completely eludes me now, I feel like. So I don't know.
I get that. I was really surprised at the September though, because it was one of those things like we have a kind of a rule in the house, right? No pumpkin candles or anything like that until at least September 1st. Like I can't do it.
I was about to say the exact same thing.
Yeah, I walk in the house and like, it's like pumpkin in here. It's early for that, right? And then no, it's September. Okay, all right.
So I like hate pumpkin spice for the most part, right? And like, so that's like a rule in my house, like no pumpkin spice. But we did break out. My wife's been spending, so she pulls all the stuff out of the shelves out in the garage, start changing up the decorations in the house. And then every year it's like, well, I put out all the fall or whatever season we're in, right? I put out all the fall decorations. We don't have enough though. I need to go get more. I'm like, we had enough last year. What happened? Like, we don't anymore, So she's been decorating and shopping and decorating again, and I love her for it. But I'm going to give her a hard time, anyway.
Sure.
Yeah,
we have to tamper that down a little bit. We can't just be going wild, going too crazy. All of a sudden, pumpkin spice will be back in my house. We have to be careful.
I mean, I make fun of the pumpkin spice, but like, I gotta say, like every year the season comes around, I'll take a PSL, man. I'm gonna have one just because it's that time of the year,
I don't like the
latte.
taste of it.
Is that what?
Yeah, the PSL.
Okay. Never heard of it, man. I had to piece it together just now. I'm bad with acronyms. I'm surprised I got it. We were in the liquor store the other day, and there was a pumpkin spice vodka or some liquor. Mm-hmm. And my aunt and my wife were like, "Oh, that'd be amazing." I'm like, "In what? In what world? Other than your coffee?" That's what they have, a pumpkin spice Bailey's. We were talking about that too.
Oh man,
for your coffee right there. Yeah. I mean, I like Bailey's. That's fine.
They give it a spin.
I see we have a comment here about the pumpkin spice Werther's Originals and realizing it's too far. I think pumpkin spice vodka is way over the shark. I mean, we're way too far.
Yeah, I'm saying, like, I will say I'm happy about fall this year, and that's something that's changed for me a lot over the last like 5 years or so. I used to really like kind of get depressed in fall because it meant winter is coming. But this year it was so hot. I was just like, man, I'm ready for fall. I'm actually ready for winter this year, and bring it on. The only thing I miss are the long days. Our days are getting shorter here, and I noticed that. It makes me a little sad, but otherwise I'm looking forward to fall.
Yeah, I don't get any. I love every season. Every season has something to offer, in my opinion. And like, I love winter. I love summer. I love fall. I love spring. Like, I like them all. They all have their downsides too, though, it feels like. But I used to live in Washington State and like the Portland area and stuff. And that was the one thing, is like that seasonal depression of just how gray it was. Like summer would be like the only time you'd come out of it for a couple months, and then you just like right back into it. I'm thankful that I don't have that anymore. But otherwise, man, I love all the seasons.
Yeah, that's my other complaint against winter here, is it does get pretty darn gray. Don't see a lot of sunshine, super short days. That gets to me. But I have a lot of like outdoor activities I still enjoy in the winter. So weekends come around, I try to make sure I get some sunshine.
Yeah.
Cool. You guys ready to roll?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Before we dig into a quick announcement for everyone, we're going to be a podcast. Woohoo! So I think starting next week, we should be available on whatever your favorite podcast forum is. Our awesome marketing team's going to get our back catalog up as well, along with this session. So you'll be able to listen to us whenever you want, however you want, in your car, so we can be with you all the time. I know everybody's going to be really excited about that. I also did an intro, and Eric poked fun of me for the intro. So I think it's pretty dope though.
Yeah. I just want to comment real fast before we get farther too, that it says, what seasons does Vegas have? And I don't live in Vegas. I do live in Nevada though, but I will say that I know plenty of people from Vegas. My dad lives there, and the 2 seasons that Vegas has is complaining that it's hot and complaining that it's not hot. I see someone says hot and hot, but that's not true. When it's like in the middle of winter, they're complaining that it's not hot.
Yeah. All right, well, cool. Let's dig in. First topic of the day is IDN Phishing. This one I thought was pretty interesting. There are some IDN phishing attacks that are taking advantage of a vulnerability in Microsoft Outlook and Microsoft 365. Yeah, what do you guys think of that one?
It's tricky. Scared me a little bit to think it through, especially with the Outlook piece of it. We may dig into that a little bit more, but that was my initial thought and what Eric had to say about it.
Yeah, well, first, just in case anyone's not familiar with what IDN is, I'll just say it stands for internationalized domain names, and it's basically domain names that include other alphabets, right? Like examples like Cyrillic alphabets and and Latin alphabets, etc. Right? It's like all of the different characters type of thing. And so what we're talking about here is that some domains you could have letters that look exactly alike or so closely alike, but they're actually from a different character set. They're a different Unicode encoding, etc. So they're technically different, right? And this has been an issue for a while, but specifically some stuff came out about in Outlook, it acting a little differently. And so that's what we're talking about here. For me, I'm the attacker, right? And so my thing is that, we don't, when we're doing phishing and stuff like that, we don't use IDNs. It was a big thing for a bit, but there's some reasons it's not the best way to go about things now. But I do know that it's got applications all over the place, right? So we can talk about those a little bit more. I'll let you guys dive into the IDN thing a little bit more, but I do have some kind of ideas on it in general.
Yeah, for sure. I think you summed it up pretty well. Not the first time we've seen this, right? I know it's been around for a long time. We were chatting about this before, and used to be, right, a lot of browser-based attacks using IDN. But I do know now that most browsers have fixed that. So if you try to phish someone, they go to an IDN domain that's using these, characters that look similar, it's actually going to be translated in your browser. So it makes it a little more obvious, right? So you put that in, you're going to see that translated to standard ASCII format, Punycode, and it becomes obvious that the domain you went to is not the domain you expected. So most of our browsers have now implemented fixes to prevent those attacks from being effective. But this one was super interesting, or really surprising to me, because of the fact that I think it's been fixed in browsers now for 3-4 years, maybe longer than that. And then to find such a widely used product like Microsoft Outlook is still susceptible, kind of blew my mind. I couldn't believe that was something they hadn't fixed at this point.
Yeah. And I think, kind of like you're talking about the browsers and why that doesn't work, and like what Eric was saying, that's one thing. But so I was just kind of thinking this one through, right? So the whole thing with Outlook is you can hover over the email address and it'll show you a legitimate contact card. Mm-hmm. So like if I get an email that's spoofed or looks like it's from Eric, but it's Eric at, FRSecure or something else, I'll hover over that. I'm like, oh, that's from Eric. I can trust this document he sent me, this link he sent me to maybe a legitimate site to download a bad document, that kind of thing. That was what scared me about it, I think. So
yeah, and to clarify too, because you brought up that point, just when you hover over the link in Outlook is not an issue. Like that's fine. I believe they got that. That's all being handled appropriately, right? It's that contact card. It's exactly that if you have, Eric at whatever, FRSecure, but you've changed the E in it to look different or whatever it might be, it'll show up as me. Like Outlook will recognize it as like the legitimate contact and actually display the contact panel and make you trust it more, right? That's the issue. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, the thing that's scary here too is exactly that. You see the legitimate contact card. I know Microsoft doesn't make any visible distinctions between those mixed character sets. So I know that there are some ways those mixed character sets will be presented, and you can see a slight difference between those character sets, right? It's hard to recognize unless you're really looking for it. But in the case of these Microsoft tools, there is no visual difference. And so it goes back to a lot of those best practices we tell our users to do. Hey, verify your sender, verify the links, blah, blah, blah. Well, in this case, they could verify that sender and be legitimately tricked by seeing that valid contact card, think it's legit, just like Pinky was saying. And so I think it's going to make identification of phishing attacks using this vulnerability very, very difficult to identify.
Yeah, I
So
did see some things that were. Go ahead, Pink.
I think you're about to say it. Go for it. I think you're on
it. I've been talking plenty. You go for it, man.
All right, man. See, we're too polite here, man. We're too polite. Yeah. So I was going to say, I think the big one that still works here, right, is the external sender warnings. So if you've got those, this is from an outside source. So if I see an email come from Eric and it says external sender, that's going to throw some alarms off, right? So that was a big one. Make sure you got that turned on. Was the big one for me there. But still, I mean, it's gonna catch some people. Like I know it will.
For sure. Yeah, I know email signing is effective as well. You can implement that, try to stop these. The thing I thought was interesting about the story as well, the researcher who identified the vulnerability, Dobby1 Kenobi, which is an awesome name.
Great name.
Apparently reported to Microsoft, and Microsoft did respond to the disclosure and said, hey, we looked at your case, and in this instance, we've decided we will not be fixing this vulnerability in our current version. They noted while spoofing could occur, the sender's identity cannot be trusted without a digital signature, right? So signing those emails again. The changes needed are likely to cause many false positives and issues another way. So they said they're not going to fix it. However, it was observed after that report that in an Outlook version, it's in my notes, I'll send this to you guys, the newest version of that Outlook client, it appears to be resolved. So even though Microsoft didn't acknowledge they were responding to his vulnerability and fixing it, it appears at least in one platform that's affected right now, it has been resolved. I don't think it has been resolved in Microsoft 365. This seemed like a specific Outlook client version where maybe they are working for a fix.
Well, they were saying in the thing that I was reading that the Microsoft 365, like the online web client, I don't think was vulnerable to this, was it? I thought it was just the Outlook client. Or maybe
I think you're right. I'm not sure.
I know for sure that it said OWA was not. I know that, but I'm not.
No, I think from what I read, it did note that Microsoft 365 is affected.
Oh, okay.
I haven't confirmed though that implementation. If you have to be using the Outlook client to connect to Microsoft 365, or if it is the online version.
Gotcha. Well, so therein lies like half the problem too, right? There are about 15 different legitimate versions of Outlook at this point, because there's a 365 version, there's the one you can just buy, 32-bit, 64-bit, and yeah, it could be that one of them works and is okay, but you can't rely on that,
Yeah, for sure.
I can say too, just in relation to what you were saying about them saying they weren't going to fix it in this version, their statement actually was, their full statement was that they weren't going to be tracking it by the security team, right? So they're not putting in a security ticket. They're not going to track it. The security team's not going to track it. They're not looking to fix that as a security issue in this, but it would inform design of future stuff. So like their design team would be aware of it, but security wasn't going to track it. So that, the fact that they already put something out, I have a feeling that maybe someone along the line was like looking at that and going, oh, we can fix this way. Like maybe it's not going to be as hard as we thought. And they just implemented it. So
cool.
What I was going to say earlier that I didn't dive into right away is that, we see a similar type of thing for web application or WAF bypasses, right? Like this has been a thing attackers have used in many different scenarios other than just domain spoofing, if you will. And that is, if we get a situation, let's say we know that someone's website is vulnerable to a SQL injection, right? And so they block some or a command injection or some kind of injection, whatever. And so they go through and they don't know how to fix it right away. It's going to take too much work. So they put it in their web application firewall to block those things from going to this, or they put somewhere in to block that stuff. Well, we've seen plenty of instances where you can use a variation, an international variation of that character, and then it'll get past the web application firewall. But then as soon as it actually gets interpreted and decoded or encoded, whatever, the encoding changes on the application, it converts it to the normal symbol, the normal thing, and then we actually get injection still. And so it doesn't surprise me to see, because I imagine that's what we're dealing with here too, right? Like when we're looking at the email address, it's not taking the same things as the links, right? It's looking at it and it's having to parse it through and actually kind of get a standard encoding, Unicode encoding to it, and it's compressing that down to the standard character, and it's causing the issue.
Yep.
I'm just actually surprised it took so long to notice it, because IDNs have been used for years now. So
yep. Same thing. Cool. Let's move along, man. Next topic today, there was a pretty interesting vulnerability that was disclosed associated to Razer gaming mouse. Razer's a manufacturer of peripherals, make mouse, keyboard, and also N95 masks, maybe. But we'll talk about that. Yeah, we'll close this segment telling you guys about that. But anyway, they're pretty popular in the gaming community. Lots of folks are using that. I think it's estimated right now there's around 100 million users worldwide. So there's a vulnerability present. Essentially in the plug and play, initiates an install known as Synapse, which is just a configuration application for your Razer devices, right? You can set up colors, maps, macros, things like that. And that Synapse application installs automatically when you plug a Razer device into your system, in this case, the Razer Mouse into your system. So essentially, there's a vulnerability that's super easy to exploit, where when that Synapse installation kicks off, it's running a system. You get to choose your installation location. You choose the installation location. Once you open that dialog box, you can just shift and right click and open PowerShell, and you're in the context of system at that point. So you basically got full admin root privileges on the box. Yeah, this one was, again, so simple when I seen this, and it made me think like, well, we just found this. How long has this been a thing for these Razer devices? And how many other devices are we going to start seeing these like PnP vulnerabilities associated, through bundled applications where maybe the same thing's possible with them too?
Yeah, I think this one made news. I don't know, never know why news hits for certain things, maybe because Razer's a popular thing or there's so many people using it or whatever, but this is a common issue. I mean, I'd say this pops up plenty of times in the past. It's going to continue to pop up. It's, in my opinion, it's that balance between user functionality in the operating system versus security, right? Like we run into this all the time where, hey, we want things to be able to just work, right? You're able to install your drivers for your things. We're going to run them a system and we trust them and whatever, but then forget that there's ways to get out.
Yep.
Yeah, it's I'm with you. That was sort of my first thoughts on this too. Is like, this can't possibly be just Razer for one thing.
Yeah.
Right. Like I know Logitech devices do this now too. Every time you plug something in, it wants to install, and I'm sure it's the same process. It's a little worrisome, right? Because I mean, I know as super awesome computer dudes, we like our RGBs and everything on our desks. So a lot of us are sitting around with these devices. But again, though, it's local, at least for now. Yeah. I know. I was looking. I've got a couple of keyboards on my desk right now. One of them, one of them is a Razer. So yeah. But this is one of those things. Like, it is local, but I did want to ask Eric, like, is there a way to take advantage of this remotely? Because it's like a trusted driver kind of situation, or is it only because it's running that executable?
This is going to be a local thing for sure. It's because of the actual being able to interface with that thing. You know what I mean? And even as an attacker, like let's say I'm on that host with a beacon or something like that, right? And I've got it. I'm on that host, but I'm not physically there. I don't. I mean, if there's some way to, maybe forcibly uninstall the driver, reboot the system, try to get it to do it again, then inject a VNC into a server process, and then connect to it and control the system, and that maybe. But we're talking like it's difficult, and it's not going to be remote. It's still a requirement to be on that machine. It'd still be local. It would just be. But even then, for the most part, again, possible, probably, but for the most part, it's going to require not only local, like you're on the machine, but you're also physically present too for this.
Makes sense. And that just goes back to what we always say too, right? I mean, if you've got physical access, you've got root access. I mean, there's 1,000 ways to achieve this.
Yeah, it's very common. I mean, and for that matter, like a very similar, just to point out a very similar vulnerability from the past was CVE 2019-1388, I believe, is a CVE where you used to be able to right click on Microsoft signed application, run as admin, then click view cert, then click view more information on the cert, which pull up IE as system, and then you can do the same attack, right? And you got a local privilege escalation through the UAC prompt of Microsoft's own stuff, right? Like it's not Razer's issue, really. I mean, Razer can fix it by not having that browsable thing, right? So they can implement a fix, but it's not Razer's issue either.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's I remember the first time I saw that one you just mentioned run through, and I was like, oh, well, that was really simple. That's a pretty cool.
Yeah, I remember that too.
And if anyone's been paying attention, there's a lot of installs nowadays that don't bring up browsers anymore, right? You have to actually put in a path, or something along those lines too. So that's, I think, part of these things too. And it's just likely how Razer's going to end up handling it, I imagine, or how they already have changed, because they fixed it already, I believe, right? So
yeah, I know Oscar and I were talking about this earlier in the week, and the thing that scares me a little bit about those types of devices, right, is I know it's supposed to be read-only memory that these things have where they're launching that app when they load up. I worry that those aren't as read-only as we think. I did read about an attack years and years ago where somebody did sort of infect a Logitech keyboard and do that. I've not heard about anything since, but that one's the one that always concerns me with those, is like maybe there's something that we don't know about those that's going to allow that to be exploited in the future.
And we think about implications too of supply chain attacks and being able to, embed malicious code in that ROM as well. It's always going to be a risk.
Mm-hmm.
One point about this one too that I thought was interesting. I think this is why that having a responsible disclosure process within your entity and response process is really important. The researcher that published this first, he responsibly disclosed to Razer. They didn't respond to him, and so then he blasted on Twitter. Right, it catches that's probably why we're talking about it today. If they had responded to his responsible disclosure, it's very likely we never heard about this.
Sure.
And so that's why it's important, right? So if folks come to you, if they find bugs or vulnerabilities and applications that you're hosting or you develop, respond, have a program to be able to acknowledge that, because if they're coming to you first, consider yourself lucky, right? In this case, Razer quickly after this caught a lot of traction on Twitter, then they responded, said, yep, we've got it, we're going to fix it, and we're going to pay you a bug bounty. And so even the guy didn't follow the proper process there, and he did publicly release. Sometimes the manufacturer's not going to pay you that bounty after that happens, but in this case they did the right thing. They're paying him the bounty, and I don't know if they fixed yet. I know they were working to fix. One question I did have for you, Eric, too, is like, what are the possibilities of spoofing, like that vendor ID, the product ID, being able to take, other devices that may not be that Razer device. So, if we're in a physical attack, right, we've just got a rubber ducky or something like that, we spoof those product and vendor IDs on that ducky to be able to initiate that same sort of PMP response from Windows. Have you seen any successes with attacks doing those types of things?
I haven't looked into it. I couldn't say, my expertise doesn't come from that level of hardware stuff. Like I like to look at certain things, but definitely haven't gotten to the point of changing the identifiers and stuff like to that level. It's right. An interesting idea. I'd love to have more time to play with something like that and figure that out. I would imagine that it may be possible, but it may be too locked. I'm not sure. I mean, if you were, let's say you weren't taking something else that was already pre-made, but instead using like an Arduino USB device or something like that might make it more easily doable. I'm not sure.
Yep. Yeah, and the other implications I would think of this too is, if you could do a spoofing like this is all highly theoretical, right? And say I was an attacker, didn't have physical access, but I was able to compromise like a VMware server, right? And that you can attach and detach USB devices from that VMware server, and it's very likely that there will be some USBs that are interactive with that server. So possibly you could pivot this to a remote attack. If you could spoof those vendor and product IDs, then manipulate the VM settings to make it appear like, okay, I've changed those, it's now spoofed, it thinks it's this device, so you have a UPnP response, and then essentially you could take that local, turn it into a remote attack through like, a very specific set of hardware and architecture that you could access, being VMware equivalent.
Yeah, do you want to join the red team?
Yeah, I just Eric, I think we've got some stuff to play with in the lab. So you can. Yeah, I mean, if you had a Razer keyboard or mouse, right, you can just enable the pass-through to your VM and your client. So yeah, you gain access to a Horizon desktop or something like that and start elevating. So that'd be fun to play with.
Yeah, let's do that, and we'll tell everybody how it went in a month or two. Cool. On side note, before we move on, I have to tell everybody about this because I told Eric before our session today, and he was super disappointed I didn't tell him when I seen this. But if you guys got a few minutes to kill, Razer also has a side project known as Project Hazel, where they're making these dope N95 masks that are loaded with like LEDs and all kinds of cool hacker stuff. So
and they've got a microphone and a speaker for amplifying your voice out of them, which I don't really care about, but I wonder if it can make me sound like Darth Vader. There's like a lot of things I'm excited about this thing. A light up mask makes me sound like Darth Vader in my head, at least, or maybe just changes my voice entirely to sound like a mouse. I don't know, but it sounds great.
I do have some concerns now, right? So if we're going to plug these into our matrix ports in the back of our head, they may have root as soon as we plug them in.
For sure.
So
Yeah.
we got to be a little careful now.
Yeah. My matrix port has UPnP for sure. So
we're owned, boys. Get used to it.
Yeah.
Emily's got the link in chat for us. Emily was talking about her setup here. It said Logitech keyboard Corsair or keyboard headset keyboard Corsair and mouse is Razer. Sounds rainbows all get out. I love it.
Yeah.
I built my own keyboard and I no longer have rainbow lights and it makes me so sad. It's just just no lights.
Got to build another one with rainbow lights, man.
Yeah, I have one on the way. I've got another case and everything on the way. I'm building another one because I've got these. No, we don't need to get into it.
I've seen some of your keyboards.
Yeah, I spend way too much money on keyboards, and we'll just leave it at that. But yeah, I've got another one coming or another build started.
You know my theory, man. It's your tools. These are your tools. If you were a mechanic, you wouldn't worry about it. So you're good.
Still. Yeah.
All right, cool. Let's move on. This one was hot topic. I know we had multiple of our vCISO clients that reached out. Just different folks were reaching out saying, hey, what should I do? The T-Mobile breach. I'm sure everyone heard about that. T-Mobile was breached again. And so I think from my count, like this is the fourth or fifth breach in the last 3 years, right? This is their biggest one. I think the total number of affected accounts were somewhere around 50 million. It was big. The data that was breached, it was different depending on the type of account you had, from what I understand, right? Like postpaid accounts, they got your first name, last name, date of birth, social, driver's license, pretty much everything. There were some other accounts, like if you had a specific type of account where it didn't include your social and your driver's license number. There were also, this is the one that got me, because whenever I seen it, it's like, oh, I'm not a T-Mobile customer anymore, but there were 40 million former customer accounts that were also compromised as part of this. I was a former customer. So, and those included social security number, license ID, so on. So yeah, they took a ton of data. We'll get into the backstory. I do think the backstory of the attacker who did this and why he claims he did this is something we should talk about. But first, the big question everybody has is like, what do I do, right? What do you guys think? What do you do? What do you tell someone when they reach out to us for that?
Yeah, so I did have a little experience with this. We were doing a kind of a live talk right after this broke. And I mean, I have to preface this, and I don't mean to be this guy, but my reaction to this attack was, yeah, of course. You know what I mean? Like, this is going to keep happening. But this one is big. And so the thing that got me a little bit was they did get the IMEIs and the IMSIs. So you do have some spoof potential there, and that worried me a little bit. So I did kind of, when this broke and people were asking, what do we do here? I didn't have a whole lot of info, but kind of what I gave out was, go reset any MFA tokens, that kind of things, and passwords you may have. Make sure you're up to date, right? You don't have years old breached passwords that may be a problem, and then now they've got your MFA or something. So
you got your PIN too, so reset your PIN.
Your PIN, absolutely. So those are the big ones for me anyway.
Yeah, I agree with those. Reset all that stuff. I do know that T-Mobile is offering some services as well. So if you think you were impacted, we'll send you the link where you can actually engage T-Mobile. They're offering 2 years of identity protection. They have another like scam blocking service they're giving everyone for free. I think that, and I do believe that's even if you're not a current client, right? If you were a previous client who wasn't impacted by that, you're still going to be eligible for those services. I would say get on that. It's free. I can't attest to the quality of the services they're going to be offering, but at this point, if they are giving you some sort of identity protection services and you're not currently using those already, which you should be, but if you're not, go get some free ones from T-Mobile and get started on that.
Yeah.
Anything you would add to that, Eric?
A piece of advice I've said to people in the past. I mean, whether you've been part of a breach or you're gonna be part of a breach, whatever, and something I've been using and continue to use through, I'm a T-Mobile customer, is just freezing your credit and stuff until you need it. I mean, I just keep it on there, and then if I need to go buy something, I need to do security or credit check, stuff like that, I need to do whatever, then I just unfreeze it and then freeze it again. Yeah. It's not too difficult. It's actually pretty easy.
What do you use to do that, Eric?
I don't remember now off the top of my head what I was using before. But I was just, you reach out to different ones. It's a few different places. So
I think that's sound advice.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's some really good advice in the chat here too, if you guys are paying attention to. I mean, so Cliff did mention here that they did reset all pins. So that was good. I didn't catch that in the articles we were looking at. Another one mentioned in the freezing credit. Looks like Chris posted a nice link here about what to do with identity theft, which is great because it's a tough process to work through. I won't mention any names. I know somebody that did go through a pretty significant identity theft issue, and it took them a couple of years to clean it up. It was rough. So yeah. Those are all good piece of advice there. And another one there that assume your PI has been had, and that's kind of where I was at.
That's what I said. Just like keep it frozen. And just, and Emily said, it's free, and all 3 credit card companies do it, right? Like you just got to go to them individually and do it. It's
I think I might still have free credit monitoring from Experian from like 2008 or something at this point. I don't know. It was in every breach they ever had. Right. For a while.
I feel like I've been breached, been part of some breach for a very long time now. One thing I don't know, maybe I just happen to get missed in some of it. I got like an initial alert from T-Mobile being like, hey, you're part of the breach. And I was like, okay, cool, good to know. And then no other communication about it whatsoever. Nothing like, hey, we're offering this, or go here to check this, or do this, or I didn't get, I mean, maybe they did send it out to everyone, or maybe they're still rolling it out. I saw some stuff that said they're still rolling out to some people, but I didn't get any of that stuff. I thought that was interesting.
From what I read, I don't know. I think you have to sign up. I just threw the link in the chat for everyone. Yep. So check out those.
I'm not worried about it as much as I just thought it was interesting that I didn't hear any more other than an initial, hey, you were breached. And that was it. Right. So
I didn't even get that. I used to be a customer. I know they have my email address that I signed up with, so they could have shot me a note, but they didn't. That's okay. So a little bit about how the attack happened. This one was really kind of interesting. I mean, we don't see this live retaliation attack reportedly, allegedly, right? John Benz, who's claiming to be the attacker in this situation, is a U.S. citizen who now lives in Turkey. He claims he gained access to the network through an unprotected router in July. From there, he was able to pivot to a T-Mobile data center, and after a few weeks, he was able to gain access to all the data we're talking about here. The timeline I'm looking at looks like, probably from beginning to end, about a 4-week attack for him to be able to get the data, extract the data, and so on. And he has been pretty open. He's done a lot of interviews, different news outlets, and the comment I found the most interesting was when they asked why he did the attack, and his answer was the breach was done to retaliate against the U.S. for kidnapping and the torture of John Aaron Benz, CIA Raven 1, in Germany by CIA and Turkish intelligence agents in 2019. We did this to harm United States infrastructure. Not often do we get that level of insight from an attacker, and not often do we see retaliation attacks. I thought that was really interesting, and I can't think of another situation where we've seen the attacker essentially say, hey, I was kidnapped by the CIA. That's why I attacked your organization.
Heck of a story, I mean, if it's true, right? Definitely makes you think a little bit about how that works. But
it's an interesting. I mean, I won't say anything to credit or discredit that story, other than if that's what happened,
right?
I feel like I would not be giving interviews and taking claim for things, because it seems like you're not protected from such things happening. So other than that, I mean, like it's a terrible thing, but it doesn't, retaliation is generally not too useful either.
Yeah, I don't think there's any justification in the attack for sure. Another note I thought this was really kind of crazy, right? So he stole the data, reportedly had buyers for the data almost instantly. And from what I've seen, the reports, right, I can't validate this, but that data set sold for 6 Bitcoin, about $275,000. And he stated he didn't ransom the network because he already had a buyer for the data. That's another path we don't typically see an attacker take. So in my thought, it's, okay, did he really get to the point, where he could have had a full ransom attack and been able to encrypt their infrastructure, or maybe identified indicators in there where they were air gapping backups and he knew they would recover if he were able to encrypt that network. So he said, I'm going to pull the data and sell it and not even go that route.
In the article I was reading, or a couple of the articles were saying that he had admitted in one of the things, I didn't see that actual quote though, that he required help to get credentials for the databases. Like, so there's someone else involved at least for that. And if that was the level of expertise and skill in that environment, I mean, maybe it's not that they had air gap backups, but he didn't know how to get to them.
Maybe
couldn't wipe them. He knew that they'd probably be able to recover those backups. So there's no point in going after that because they're not going to go for it.
Yep, for sure.
This one started with did we ever see what kind of router or what kind of firewall it was that he? Because
I don't think it has. I don't think it's been released yet.
Yeah, I was curious if it was the kind of one of the one we've been talking about, right? With the FortiGate or whatever, the one that or Sonic Wall. Yeah, I was curious if it was just another one of those. So.
Oh man, I hope not.
Yeah, me too. Right. Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that.
He did say their security was awful. And there was another comment I didn't understand. He said generating noise was one goal. Did you guys see that? And I don't know what he meant by that. Like, and my initial thought was like, okay, was the dude trying to get caught? Was he, in there? He already had the data. He was just going to see how far he could push it to see if they could identify him. And I think they did originally or eventually identify his presence, right, and kick him out. Why do that?
Yeah, there's a couple different things in there that kind of, I mean, one, first and foremost, I'm not going to say their security is good or not, but I know someone who's in a retaliation attack is never going to say it was good.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So take it for what it's worth. But beyond that, yeah, the generating noise thing, I took the same way. Like, do you mean that you were being noisy on purpose and they didn't catch you, so that's why it's bad? What does that exactly mean? Another thing, I just wasn't sure, did they actually catch him? Because I saw one report or a couple reports saying that it was originally brought to their attention because a security firm or a research firm or someone brought to them that, hey, we see your stuff being sold on the dark web. So like, and then they responded and said, okay, this is this and this and this. He did say in his interviews that they eventually got kicked out, but I don't know. I couldn't tell for timeline. I couldn't back up enough to say, did they kick him out before finding out about the stuff being on the dark web, or was that what led them to start the investigation? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, I thought the original reports were the one about somebody else reported it. That he didn't. It wasn't that.
And I think in the T-Mobile official statement, they said we discovered an attacker. They didn't tell how. So maybe that's how they discovered an attacker, was through that intel of their records being sold. Yeah. So before we move on, then, just in summary, monitor your credit, freeze your credit, reset your passwords, all that good stuff. I see a link from Tyler I want to touch on really quick before we move on here. The Hacker News. There was a report posted because we started to add this to our agenda. We didn't because we've talked about it a few times before. So hackers leak VPN credentials for roughly 87,000 devices. This is in relation to the Fortinet VPN vulnerability that we've talked about on here before. I know that is a really old vulnerability, CVE 2018-13379. So it's been around for nearly 3 years at this point. And those data sets have been released before. I know that Eric does own one of those previously released data sets, and we were looking at that to do a little comparison, right? And it has grown, right, since the last data set was released. But the reality is, I was doing research on this vulnerability just a couple months ago. There are still tons of vulnerable servers out there, vulnerable network devices out there, and it blows my mind. This is a 3-year-old vulnerability that literally, that you don't have to do anything except hit a specially crafted URL. You can see every user that's logged into your device. You can see the password of that user. You can see the group that user is a member of. You can see the source IP that user is logging in from. And so not only are those devices still leaking right now, in my own personal research, there's a lot of devices out there that are compromised as we speak. So anybody on this call, the takeaway from this is just patch your device. If you're running FortiGate, make sure it's patched and up to date, and you're going to be fine. Cool. Let's move on to the next story. Got a couple more here, and then we'll get into the Phishing Report and the hacker tip of the month. Hear that? I said month this time, not week. Hey,
hacker tip of the century.
Next was kind of a win for the blue teamers. I called this hacking the hackers. Our friend Sentinel-1, they found a critical bug in the Cobalt Strike team server. So you can essentially take down a team server. If you get a beacon, you can parse the information from that beacon. You can essentially send a fake reply, overload the memory of that team server, and shut the team server down. It's a win for the blue teamers, I say, because I know that most of our attacks were, working right now. In cases we're working, the ransom attacks, they're using Cobalt Strike as their primary attack tool. We also know that most of those versions of Cobalt Strike that are being used for true offensive purposes, illegal offensive purposes, are probably pirated, right? And so they're not getting updates. I know that Cobalt Strike patched this, so that's awesome. So our red team doesn't have to worry about this. If someone detects us during our legitimate activities, they can't DOS our team server. But on the flip side, most of the bad guys probably aren't going to have that patch for a while. Hopefully, they're not going to have that patch for a while. So that's a great tool to put in our arsenal. If we are investigating now and we do identify Cobalt Strike, we can parse that data and we can hopefully send a packet back to crash that team server, which could be a very valuable weapon in trying to defend the network right now. I was super excited to see that. I don't know about you guys.
Never. Don't take my tools.
Yeah. I'll have to say, Eric, as I was reading through that, I was like, oh man, that sucks. And then I got to the bottom. I was like, oh, the legit version's okay. All right. Our guys are good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take a little bit of a negative Nancy approach here on this one. I'm a little worried about trying this. I want to try it, to be honest with you. I want to fire back because it sounds like fun. I do worry though with some of the ones where they have like, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can do like a fallback IP, right? So if your one team server goes down, or maybe DNS, you do it that way with that kind of setup. I do worry that we'll hit the one we find only to them still have a path back in, and we don't see the other one just yet, and we just kind of tip our hand a little bit.
Well, let me be clear too, and the way we would utilize this tool, or should utilize this tool, shouldn't be from any identifiable IP, right? We should go through anonymizers, make sure we're protecting our source. So if we are in a network, and likely these instances can, it's not certain they're only going to be used in one ongoing attack at that point, right? There could be multiple attacks involved. And so if you're protecting your client by taking those proper precautionary steps, then we could put in those anonymizers and make sure it's difficult to track where that packet came from. I don't even know if they have the ability on the flip side. That's something I would really like to see. If we have an old version of Cobalt Strike that is still vulnerable to this, it would be good to stand it up in our lab and let's run that attack to determine what kind of forensic evidence our attackers are going to identify about how that packet was identified and delivered to us. Maybe there's identifiers in there where they can say, oh, I know it was, a mimic of this particular host's beacon, so they can track to that client. Like you said, maybe they have a fallback server. Either way, I think it's interesting.
Comments in general about all of that. One, you can have fallback IPs, but you still just have one server. Generally, I mean, you might have multiple. Okay, so you might have multiple servers with different types of beacons running. You might have a DNS beacon that checks in once every 6 months or something like that. So if you crash one server that's checking in every 5 minutes, every 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it might be, and you crash that one, then sure, the other one's still up and running, right? But that's not so much a fallback IP. That's just another beacon, another mechanism, another keep alive, right? Another entirely different infrastructure. If you were to have a situation where, because you can definitely set up rotating addresses and stuff for the server, and so if one of them gets banned or blocked by content filtering or something else, you put a block in for it, then the other ones will just roll over and keep working, right? However, those all lead back to the same server. So if you were to crash that server, taking one down is fine. And then on the note of what the attacker would see, the IP address, pretty much. I mean, you'd be able to spoof the rest of the information. And for that matter, if the attacker has an infrastructure set up where they're forwarding multiple different IPs into it, if they haven't configured it in a way to pass through a certain way, which a lot of times you're not gonna, then they actually wouldn't even get that. They'd get the IP of their redirectors and not your IP. They wouldn't actually know where exactly it came from, potentially, in some situations. We've run into this in other ways that I'll talk to you guys about offline sometime if you ever want to, but I do know something about receiving some rogue stuff coming into through Cobalt Strike, and have tried to route, and it's difficult, I'll tell you that. Also, just keep in mind, for anyone who wants to screw with the attackers, this is a critical bug that allows you to crash that server. That's fixed. You could definitely still parse out this information and send all kinds of bogus data to the attacker and annoy the heck out of them. That's not going to stop. And it always has been. Always been an issue. So,
Man, all I heard was green light from Eric. I don't know if anybody else heard anything. I just heard fun times for all.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Very cool. So let's touch quickly on this one. I do want to make sure we have time for the phishing report and the hacker tip of the century of universe multiverse. Maris botnet. There was a botnet that's been all over the news the last 24 hours or so, and really just want to bring this up for awareness for everybody because it's huge. We're seeing like an estimate of like 250,000 infected devices. To compare, most historical botnets, the largest ones have been around 50,000 devices, and they can send about 21.8 million requests per second. That's pretty scary.
Right now, it was only 17 million last month, so it's growing fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, what are you going to do, right? I mean, like that's a lot of data. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we don't know a lot about the group behind it right now. I know we were doing some research, like, is this Mariah? It appears like some people have said it is the same, but I think it's different. We don't know really at this point. Like we can all agree we don't know, right?
Yep. Yeah.
There's a lot of mixed information out there from all the different articles, and since this is something I've been involved in researching beyond that, this is a tough one for me to really know the truth on. But nonetheless, there's I think devastating is a good word for the amount of throughput it can put. Devastating DDoS botnet that's doing some damage.
Yeah, they hit Krebs on security this week. Krebs actually did a post on it. Luckily, he said it was short-lived, but we do know from the profile that they are targeting companies that have an extensive online presence and infrastructure. So essentially your business relies upon uptimes of these systems that you're hosting online, publicly available. And before they are launching an attack against you, they are essentially trying to ransom you before they DOS you. And I know, Pinky had mentioned this. We talked last month about the 4-prong approach, right? And the DDoS being one of those prongs now as part of a ransomware deployment. But this one's a little different because they're not ransoming you. They're just going to send you a note and say, hey, we're going to take down all of your public facing applications and infrastructure that is required for your business unless you pay us today. And if you don't pay, then they direct their botnet to your infrastructure and you have a real bad day.
It was after we talked about that too. I remember it actually did have somebody bring that up. I think it was in 2018 that they had a similar threat. It was a we're going to DOS you if you don't pay a ransom. It was the first time I'd ever heard of that at that point. They did some research and decided that they weren't worried about it, and they just said, all right, cool, whatever, go for it. Nothing ever came of it, but it was an interesting attack pattern. So yeah, I just thought of that as you were talking. So
one thing that bugs me about the whole thing, I mean, it is what it is. You can't do too much about it, but when we talk about getting ransomed, like normally, right, like encrypted file ransoms, there's the whole like, hey, we have your files done, we've already done the damage, right? You're not paying for the threat, you're paying for like the reality, right? Potentially on the thing. And then on top of it, like, let's say, which we never recommend you do, but let's say you pay the ransom, you get your stuff back and whatever. Afterwards, you can try to patch up the holes that got them in the first place, try to be more diligent, do all the different things and try to prevent this from happening again, right? With DDoS, that's not an option. Like if you're threatening to DDoS you, it's like, well, what stops them from going like next week and be like, hey, we're still going to DDoS you if you don't pay? I mean, like there's nothing there's nothing changes, right? There's like, I mean, I definitely don't recommend anyone ever pay a ransom for a DDoS threat because there's nothing at all to stop it from continuing to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's going to turn into the mob, right? Instead of knocking at your business door and saying, hey, here's my dues this month.
Yeah,
it's going to be shooting
pay
you
us monthly.
Yeah.
Give me my hacker tip of the month. So
yeah.
Oh man.
We do know one thing really quick about the botnet is it consists mostly of MikroTik compromised devices. My understanding is MikroTik claims there's been no new vulnerabilities posted on those devices since a major vulnerability in 2018. So it's unsure at this point how they're compromising those devices. Either devices were previously compromised in 2018 or people haven't patched those devices that are in use, so they're still vulnerable, like the FortiGate stuff. So if you have a device, patch it. I don't think there's a lot of domestic use of MikroTik devices, so hopefully it's not going to affect anyone here, but if you happen to be using those, make sure you're up to date. All right.
Yeah.
It's been a good show so far, and we still got some great things. The Phishing Report. Pinker Man, what you got?
Yeah. So this is one that came up, honestly, as part of a class that I'm doing a little bit of training. It was one that I don't think it's particularly new, but it's an interesting one that I hadn't really seen in the wild. So I just kind of wanted to bring it out there. It's a Office 365, Microsoft 365 based attack essentially. But what it is it's uses the like open authentication applications. OAuth is what those are often called. So what it does is you'll get, say, a spoofed email that looks like it's from, Oscar at FRSecure. It's probably not, but you'll get the little display name, so it'll kind of throw you off a little bit. And so that all looks fine. And then the email has an attachment in it, or at least looks like an icon for an attachment. That looks pretty legit as well. When you click on it, it actually takes you off to MicrosoftOnline.com. It's a legitimate Office 365 login. But what it is part of that URL is pointing you to authorize an OAuth application that belongs to the attacker. So you log in, you just kind of click yes and move on through like you're not thinking too much about it. You will see you're authorizing an app, but most people are just going to click OK. With that, you basically give the attacker access into your systems, right? So they can search your email box, export items. And one of the trickier ones that I saw was, so let's say you've got Word documents out on like a OneDrive or something like that. They can go drop macros into that, drop a beacon in there. You open that up later and boom, you're compromised. So, the big thing to watch out for with that one is just, review OAuth apps pretty frequently in your environment and turn them off if you can. If you don't use them, turn that ability off for your users so they can't apply those. So pretty simple one this week, or this month. Sorry, I did it too. But yeah, just something to look out for.
Yeah, I think that's sound advice. You got to pay attention to audit, just like you would anything else, and see what kind of OAuth has been permitted into your environment. So is there an opportunity, and I don't know, this is a question for either of you guys, can you do essentially an approved listing for OAuth apps within Microsoft 365? So can you set up, hey, we're using this, corporate app. We need this to utilize OAuth. This is our only approved application for OAuth. Anything else we got, I'll shut those down. I don't know if that's the opportunity or not, Yeah,
I'm pretty sure you can add those to like an approved list.
Okay.
Yeah, and you can definitely review them and that kind of thing, but I believe you can actually just have a preset list.
Yeah, so maybe that's another thing for organizations. If you require OAuth work to implement that approved list and don't permit anything else into your infrastructure.
Yeah, keep in mind too that OAuth, approvals and stuff like this are for a lot of major logins and things, right? Whether it be your Google account, your GitHub, your Facebook, your whatever. So the attack might not be a Microsoft related attack. It might still exist in other forms too.
Yep. Cool. Thanks, Pink. All right. The hacker tip of the century. What you got, man?
Definitely not that good. So it's not so much like a way, a hacking tip in general, but for anyone who's doing the job, anyone who's a pen tester, anyone who's doing bug bounties, anyone who's whatever, it's news anyway. Yesterday, at least I think it was yesterday, OAuth updated the top 10 for 2021. Now, finally, since 2017, we've been using the same OAuth top 10, and it has been updated. So if you're not familiar with that, go check it out. Some kind of stuff I'll go over with it in general, just kind of give a quick rundown because we don't have a lot of time, but some changes from it, right? In 2017, injection was number 1. It's moved to 3. Broken authentication has moved from number 2 to number 7. So it's gone down quite a bit, and it's changed to identification and authentication failures. So it incorporates a little bit more stuff than just broken authentication. The sensitive data exposure got changed to cryptographic failures. It's a lot more specified, but then on top of being more specified, it moved from number 3 to number 2, which confused me at first because sensitive data exposure, I could see that happening all the time. There's a lot of sensitive data that gets exposed by websites, but cryptographic failures is not as common when I think about it. I think about it like I'm immediately going, they're using bad hashing or passwords or whatever. But what it actually takes into consideration, which many of you out there who've gotten scan data and or pen tests or whatever will have seen, is things like using old weak cryptographic ciphers in different types of communication, right? Or supporting them, right? Not even necessarily that they're the ones that are preferred, but just supporting those old things or supporting old TLS versions, stuff like that all falls into that category. So that's a more prevalent one now. XXE used to be its own thing. It now is just pushed into security misconfiguration. It's no longer its own thing. It's just part of that now. Broken access control used to be number 5. It is now number 1. It's what we're seeing the most of, I think, across the board. Broken access control being things like being able to, what's called an insecure direct object reference, a situation where you might have this person can access this record, but you don't show them the other record, so you assume they won't access them. But if they specify their ID to that other record, they can get access to it. Things like that, and all kinds of other things. But basically, people are able to gain access to things they shouldn't be able to. Security misconfiguration moved from number 6 to 5. Cross-site scripting is no longer its own thing. That's now a member of injection, so that got removed from the list, and it's part of that. Insecure deserialization is now removed from the list as well, and it's part of software and data integrity failures, which is a pretty broad range of things. That's a new category for this year, and it is essentially anything from things like that, like trusting the integrity of data that's controlled by a user, but also trusting integrity of data or code that's coming from other places. So it also incorporates some use of third-party tooling and stuff that you just trust. You just pull into your application and use it without, and trust it without actually checking the integrity of it first. And then using components with known vulnerabilities has changed slightly to vulnerable and outdated components, and it moved from number 9 to 6 because it is definitely more popular and becoming more and more popular. And insufficient logging and monitoring is now security logging and monitoring failures, and has moved from 10 to 9. And there's 3 new categories for this year. One of them was insecure design at number 4. Insecure design is extremely broad, and it basically is addressing things like, it's basically trying to say, hey, when you're making applications, when you're doing development of these applications, you need to have a secure design flow. Your software development lifecycle or others, lifecycle needs to be taking security in mind, right? And so as you're developing different functionalities and stuff, thinking about the security of them. And so it has a very large range, has a lot of CWEs associated with it that I won't get into because we don't have a ton of time, but definitely worth looking into a little bit more. But that's kind of what it's hitting on. Software and data integrity failures, already mentioned that one. That's now incorporating the things like this insecure deserialization, et cetera. And then they've added server-side request forgeries, which is new to this one. Definitely one I predicted was going to make this list. There's been a lot of stuff in the news. Proxy logon, I believe it was the Capital One breach a couple of years back, and other types of things like that, where we're, SSRFs are becoming more prevalent. It's not so much that they're always bad, but they can be really bad in some scenarios, right? And I know that they did to take this list and make this list is they took a lot of the research of the vulnerabilities that we've been seeing that have been found in applications and a bunch of data from that, but they also took another set of data, which was an industry like poll or something like that, where they took information from people and said, hey, what do you think the main issues are? And SSRF made it on because of that, not because we've seen a ton of it, but because everyone is saying it's an issue, and we're probably going to see more of it, right? And it's a big one, so it's made the list now finally because of that. I have so much more notes to go over, but I'm going to keep it brief. I'll just say definitely, if you're doing anything with web applications, you're just interested, whether you be a defender or an attacker, go check out the new list, dig into it. There's some new stuff for sure, and some new ways to kind of handle things. OAuth.org/top10 with a capital T. It is case sensitive. So capital T, lowercase OP 10. Check it out.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Eric. I appreciate it. And we'll make sure we include that link for everybody as well. Get that out. And I think, Pink, you're going to send us some notes for the OAuth stuff as well, right? And we can share that in our summary. But yeah, thanks a lot, everybody, for joining us. I think that's it, dudes, unless you guys got anything else.
That's it.
I'm good. Yeah.
All right. We guys have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next month. Adios.
Bye, Roddy.